Good afternoon. This is Ed Salzberg, and speaking for my sidekick, Jimmy Baker, we welcome you to our next webinar in the series that we've been doing for the past year. This one is on social media strategies for government contractors, and we're really pleased to have a really experienced former government support contractor and a real expert in social media approaches, Mike Hackmer. And Mike and Jimmy have worked together before, and we really know what kind of credibility and detailed information, real guidance you're going to get from Mike in this webinar. Mike is the founder of CEO Social Web Tactics. He used to be with Deltek, and he used to be with a small government contractor, so he really brings a set of skills here that combine real knowledge of the government industry, government contracting industry, how government contractors operate, and how social media really fits into an overall marketing program for government contractors. I want to thank the various organizations that have worked with us to promote the event. EasyGovOps, which is a business intelligence company. They provide you access to information about what the government is buying, and they help you identify opportunities. They're probably the most affordable service in this arena and excellent for small to mid-sized companies. Social Web Tactics is Mike's company, and he'll say a few words about that. Set Aside Alert has been a partner of ours for several of the webinars. They produce a newsletter designed directly for the small business market, for 8As, for HubZone, and you get a tremendous amount of information about the arena itself from a small business perspective, and then also details about specific procurements. Jimmy Baker wrote the book, How to Win Business from the Government. It's a real how-to manual on how to identify what the government is buying and how they're buying it. It's probably the best resource around. Not probably, it is the best resource around. I just recommend that book highly. I keep it with me all the time as a reference. Jimmy, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about a new program that you and I are going to be launching in the summer, where we do a much deeper dive into the types of topics that we've been hitting in these webinars.
And folks, thank you for listening to this. We will get to a moment, and we've got some real deep discussions we're going to have on social media, the average age of the government buyer, and how you need to really begin sharpening your social media in lieu of all of the research and marketing campaigns and capture strategies. We're going to get to that in just a second, but we wanted to let you all know that during our webinar series that many of you have been a part of over the last year, we give generally a high-level overview. We try to give you step-by-step tactics, but frankly, it's not enough time. And I train all over the country, as does Ed, and we work with people. And for many of you that have sat into our sessions, I give you a snapshot how to read a budget. I usually spend hours with a client going into that in detail. So we're going to be having some online training courses. They're going to be at a minimal cost, and where we're going to be getting into some deeper dive. I know when I was a young guy coming up in this business, I had the benefit of going to the Terry Kelly School, Dale Carnegie Sales Call, George Washington University for my master's certificate, and there's not a lot that Ed and I have seen on the market that really teaches you the fundamental techniques to hunt, capture, and win. So we encourage you to look at these. We're going to be contacting you shortly with class sizes. I think they're going to go for about $50 a session, but well worth your time, and we'll be getting more information on that down the road. And there's a short survey at the end of the event that y'all can look at to know, get a little more information on that. So with that, I'll hand things back over to Ed.
And we've also included a slide with some our preliminary thinking of what the course outline would look like, with some idea about timing and curriculum level, and also what you'll be learning from it. This is where we'd like your help in refining this a little bit, which is why we put the survey questions in the end. And with that, we're going to launch right into the webinar. So Mike, I'm going to turn this right over to you.
Thanks, Ed, and thank you, Jimmy. And Jimmy and I worked together back several years ago, Computer Marketing Associates, and the book is a great resource. We used it a great deal at GovWin when I was there at Deltek, and had Jimmy on a lot of different events about BD. So it's great to be able to team up with him and with Ed on these different webinars. Really quickly, I'll just give a couple of moments about social web tactics, and then we'll dive right into everything. Essentially, social web tactics is a digital agency, marketing agency, and sales agency. We're really focused on taking what goes online in social media through search and through the web and your website, and really trying to turn that into real in-person connections. I think a lot of people get lost in sort of the social media world, and how do we engage people on Facebook, or how do we do this, how do we do that? Really, at the end of the day, it comes down to what your business needs, and your business needs leads, and your business needs revenue. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business for very long. So really, we try to take a very practical approach to it, and so that's a lot of what we're going to try to talk about today. Is ultimately how do we, take the social media and use it to ultimately create those kinds of relationships.
And
really
Mike, before
yes.
you move forward, we are going to be leaving time for questions at the end. And on the GoToWebinar panel, there's a place for people to write in their questions. So we're going to leave a lot of time at the end for that.
Great. So really quickly, just to get the terms out of the way, I know a lot of people probably already understand the difference between social media, social networks. It's actually, the two terms are used interchangeably, whereas social networking means a little something different. So social media is obviously the platform that people use. When we talk about Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo, all these different kinds of things, Foursquare, those are all social media platforms, and essentially they're really communication channels. Think about it just like any way that you want to broadcast or effectively get content out to a particular place. Those are all different kinds of social media platforms. Whereas the networking side of things, social networking, is really the active engagement. So when we talk about social networking, we're talking about a person engaging with another person or with a group of people online. And really the goal of that kind of two-way communication is to build a relationship. And like any relationship, it takes time. And I think one of the important things that people need to understand as we get into social networking and talk about all these different tactics and strategies and things that people need to utilize is that this is a time-taking exercise. And you have to have and exhibit sort of a patience because in real life you don't just walk up to somebody and build trust within an instant, within a 5-minute conversation. The same is true in the virtual sense too. We really have to spend time, build that trust, build that relationship. And hopefully with these different tactics and strategies and then getting into more detail, you'll be able to do that. The third definition that I have here for search engine optimization, SEO is not going to be something that we're going to get into a lot of detail with this particular webinar, but it is important because search is really what drives so much web traffic these days, particularly through Google and through Bing. And if you're not really on that first page of search results, in organic search results, you're really going to be missed as far as your business and the kinds of services and products that you're offering. Now, how that ties into social media and social networking is actually kind of interesting. And just very briefly, I'll say that part of the algorithms that go into determining your search rankings do have to do with social signals, how well your content is performing in blogs, how well you're doing in different kinds of social channels. And while things like Facebook or LinkedIn are technically in some cases closed communities and don't appear in search results, Google and Bing do count them. So it is important to make sure that you're very active socially in order to get good search results. So when we talk about social media and social networking, I look at it as both an opportunity and a significant challenge. And why is that? And a lot of that has to do with the image that I have on the screen here with the clock, with all of these great social media platforms on there. And there's so many out there. How do you pick which one? Well, the reality is it's a great opportunity to get your voice heard, to get your business recognized, but it also represents a significant challenge. Which network do you use? And of course, how much time do you ultimately spend using these different social media platforms? That, I think, is one of the most significant challenges that companies run into, is not understanding how they best manage their time with limited resources, with limited budget, all of those kinds of things. Now, invariably, I often get asked, why do I need a social strategy for the government marketplace? Or in some cases, I get asked, oh, I know I need to be on Facebook, but how do I get there? Well, the reality is you don't really know that you need to be on Facebook because Facebook isn't for everybody. You know, your better network may be Google+, maybe if you're very image-based, depending upon your target industry, it could be Pinterest, it could be YouTube. So I think part of the questions that you should be asking are, who are your customers? Where are your customers? Where are they going to consume information, particularly when it relates to what it is that you're focused on? And then ultimately, how do I engage those customers?
And Mike, one of the things that we're going to get into with the audience later, and I want to make this really clear for everyone listening, is that we're going to show you some statistics later that will describe the government person. And one of the things that when you're doing, you know, I specialize in doing budget research and marketing campaigns, is that when you've verticalized and identified your message, or your team are hunting a set of proposals, you'll actually use that information and leveraging it into the correct social strategy for that government customer. And Mike's going to go into a little bit more of it, and we're going to show you later in the presentation some things that you might be surprised, because I was sure was when I looked at what the government customer actually is. Mike?
Yeah, sure. So really quickly, how far have we come in technology? Well, you know, hopefully none of you actually do remember and using an ENIAC computer. But of course, you know, from a historical perspective, you know, this is how the technology boom got started. These gigantic computer systems that could do a handful of things that, you know, took up whole floors and whole buildings, and you know, and I always sort of love the story that, you know, when this computer was switched on, that the lights of the city of Philadelphia dimmed. I think that was kind of funny. And then of course I get into when I first started getting into computers and information and participating in networks, and that was back in the early 80s. And this is a little bit of a grainy image of a Color Computer 3, my, you know, Coco. I actually still have one. So excited to get the 128K memory, you know, upgraded to 512, and you know, access the bulletin board network, which, you know, a lot of people don't realize there was something before the internet, and that was the BBS system. And you know, you get your 1200, 2400 baud modem and dial into these great networks, and basically there was file sharing before there was Napster, and it was fantastic. You know, you could get in, you could dial in, trade software, and do all this kind of stuff. And that was sort of the early 80s in computing and technology and data. Now think about it, we handle emails that have more than 512 kilobytes of information. And what's, you know, when I look at data and I look at electronics and computers and technology and social media and all these things, you know, you can learn a lot by what kinds of devices people are using and how they're using them. So from Consumer Electronics Association, you know, look at what people are buying and why are they buying these things. People are interested in mobility and constant connectivity. And what's driving that? Mobile and tablets. Tablets are going through the roof. In fact, they're predicting, the Consumer Electronics Association predicting, that the overall household penetration of tablets is going to rise from 22% of homes having at least one tablet to 44% of homes. And that is incredibly significant. We'll go into that a little bit more detail in a second. So when you think about your audience, when you're thinking about who's using what and who's focused on you know, what devices, you know, remember, it's all about access to information, data, mobility, being able to stay in constant contact and have that level of connectivity. And it dictates in many ways the kinds of things and devices that, you know, you need to be planning for when you're looking at your social media and your web strategy. Another important point is, you know, the NSA, other government agencies, we've seen this going on for years. Ever since mobile devices started really becoming more prevalent in the government space, government agencies have been trying to play catch-up to the security challenges, you know, all the different issues that come into play with different devices and how these devices ultimately can be certified by the government so people can use them in the field, whether it's, you know, Blackberries, it's Android, iPhone, so on and so forth. And you know, the NSA has done a lot to try to get it so that people can actually use tablets and mobile devices in the field of operation for classified information access, and of course to use social media and other forms of you know, websites. So let's look at federal employees in terms of how they're using social media. And though the survey is a couple of years old, the data is actually still valid. It's a little bit higher now. But so if you think a couple of years ago, 70% of government employees and contractors who responded to the survey were using social media on mobile devices. You know, that number is only higher now. And when you look at sort of the top 5 uses for social media within the federal government, to inform decision making. And that's significant because if a vast majority of everybody in the government space is using social media and is using their mobile devices and their computers to make better decisions, what a better reason do you have than to be using social media? Communication, all those other kinds of things are natural extensions of using social media. Research, all of those things play into how you should ultimately structure your social media strategy. And of course, if you're in the government space, if you're a government contractor, you're obviously very familiar with GovLoop. It's a very popular website and community. A lot of great discussions. When I was at GovWin, we used GovLoop a lot in sort of getting an understanding of what government agencies were going through and what people in the government space were challenged with. A lot of great discussion groups there, GSA Interact, GovTwit, and then of course GovWin, which to be honest is actually not as much of a community as it used to be. There's a lot of the great data that existed from input, and I know that there are other alternatives out there that are probably a little more cost-effective for small to mid-sized businesses, so definitely look at those alternatives. But when I was at GovWin and ran the social media team, we were very focused on providing resources to government contractors who were just starting out. That was probably about 85% of our total network of over 30,000 people were companies that had never secured a government contract before. So definitely look at GovWin as far as resources. It's not as much of the community and the networking dialogue, and TFCN also as well has a lot of good stuff still available. So when we talked about tablets and mobile devices, well, people use these devices for different things. Smartphones, for example. It's people use smartphones to stay engaged, and a big part of that engagement comes from texting, using other kinds of simple forms of communication, as well as accessing web and other kinds of things like that. They're really trying to stay engaged. Social media plays a very big part in that. Tablets. Vast majority of people are using tablets for research and news. It's a great resource. And computers. Vast majority use computers just to read email. And that's a lot of what they do during the course of the day. So when you think about the different devices and you're thinking about your web strategy, and that's the other thing that I think people need to look at as you're kind of trying to build your social strategy, identifying user habits, how do you meet somebody's desire to listen, learn, and engage? Well, it all does come back to your web strategy and ultimately to your search strategy. When you're building out your website, if you're looking to do a web design project, for example, you've got to be thinking build to the smallest screen and out. You can't be thinking, let's build this great big website, and we can make it smaller and do a mobile version later. Absolutely not. When you look at the search volume and the direction that is going, even though desktop search has increased a little bit recently, it's still not going to be able to keep up pace with mobile search. And that has to be the direction when you're looking at your social strategy. It is all about engagement. So you always need to be thinking about where that engagement is occurring, what type of device, and then ultimately how am I reaching people through social media? Am I doing something that fits within that device and within that particular interest level of that person? So again, looking at search, I'm an SEO specialist as well as a social media specialist, so 19.2 billion core searches last month, which is actually down. Sorry, this is a little bit dated. This is actually down from May. And, we look at the data from April even, and Google obviously has a huge market share still. Bing, Yahoo, Yahoo is actually all powered by Bing, as is Facebook. So that's something to take into account, whereas AOL gets its search power through Google. And what we see here as far as the decline in search share from Google, a lot of this is anticipating that Microsoft and Bing, through their mobile acquisitions and through having their mobile operating system installed on different phones, is going to be gaining search share simply because of the penetration in the mobile market. So this is something important to think about because in the past, I think a lot of people building out their web and search strategies have always been thinking about Google, and Google is the most important search engine to think about. But the reality is when you're looking at people who are using Facebook for search and other kinds of things that are powered by Bing, you can't ignore Bing completely as you probably were able to do 2 or 3 years ago. And it's definitely something that you need to consider as part of your strategy. So this is some of the data that Jimmy has collected and things that I think he's going to probably want to talk to as far as the sort of, this median social media age user, and ultimately as well, some of the data that relates to, who is the ultimate in the government buyer. And I'll just say, a couple of quick words and then turn it over to him to run through the next, couple of slides. But I think it is important to understand the changing dynamic within the media space. And I work with clients and companies that, that deal with media companies, that deal with traditional media companies, that deal with digital media companies. And there is a huge change that is going on in this country between people who are older, an older demographic, and younger demographics coming in. So you really have to be very sensitive to how people consume that information. And I think a lot of the data is showing that sometimes people get in their heads, well, social media is very young, it's very youthful, it's hip, it's the way to go. Well, again, you really have to understand who's your buyer. And if your buyer is 40, 50, 60 years old, they may not be as engaged in social media as you think. There may be other ways that you need to be reaching them, and that's just something to consider. So, Jimmy, I'll turn this over to you for a couple of slides. Sure.
Yeah. And folks, there's 2 points that we want to make in this, and that I hope that you'll take away with it. One, when you're contracting with the government, whatever vertical that is, whether it's citizen engagement, whether it's updating and stuff, you're going to need to understand the mission of that government agency and who that demographic is they are trying to get to. So you may need to provide the government a social media strategy to do that. I'm going to be posting an interview on my site that I did with the Director of Public Communications here in the state of California, Karen Wong, and talked a great deal about this. But then what you also ultimately have to understand is who is the government buyer? Who are you actually selling to? Because at the end of the day, the type of things that I do with business development and different campaigns is you're targeting what your company does towards someone. And the fact is, if your target market isn't, is not tweeting, is not doing, is not where you're sending your message, then it's missed. So let's look at it this way. I went out on OPM's site and said that the average age of a government worker is 54. That's the baby boom generation. The next biggest demographic coming up up there is my generation, which are Gen Xers. So we're just going to show you some quick statistics on this. Think about it this way. Most of the folks in the baby boom would have gone through high school and college without a computer. They are very into their careers, community involvement. They're motivated, hardworking. Remember, they're the kids of the greatest generation ever. They're confident in tax. They believe that my generation Y should pay their dues and conform to a culture of work. And when we looked at what Pew Internet Research was saying is that there's a big growth in the baby boomers from 50 to 64 that are using things, but we also have to have an understanding of where they're at. So hence the point is, and if you'll go to the next slide, is that if you're marketing someone that's in the baby boom generation that is the senior government decision maker and is in their 50s and is looking there, you need to understand the best way to market to that demographic and then ultimately be able to tell them what they might need to do with their social strategy to access people in different generations. When you think of the next generation, which is, my people, all of us that came of age in the 80s, we have a very different view of things. We adapted, as Mike was saying, I remember my TRS-80, and then by the time I graduated college, the 386DX was out, and I went from a world of no web to web, from 8-track to cassettes to CDs to iTunes, and my last one is the favorite, from Pong to the PlayStation 3, which I love. So we've become very adaptable, and look at some of these statistics on the next generation coming up. 67% of us use email daily. I'm included in that. Don't ever underestimate the power of strong email campaigns. And with a lot of things that I do for client, we generally are still seeing a bulk of our campaigns coming out of email. And I'll give you an example. I recently did an event in the California market, and we generated 17% of our audience from LinkedIn, where and there were some other things, but the bulk of it came from email and the phone. Look at this here. Most Gen Xers purchase online. Almost 40% of them said they could live without social networks. So interesting, but 72% use it. So understand when you're going after a demographic of government that's in a leadership position, you may need to augment the way that you message things. If let's just say, for example, and then and you can go into the next slide, that you're targeting a group of CIOs, and you've come to the understanding that those folks are baby boom generation, you may do far better with posting a few things, maybe in LinkedIn and Facebook, because we know that they're using, or possibly a video, and then driving a campaign through email with a downloaded white paper. It's all about who you're targeting and how they'll respond to what your unique selling proposition is. And you really need to spend a great deal of time going through this. And when you add this in to some of the analysis that we do in agency and the mandates and the budget and funding, you can really sharpen a message that I believe creates an unforgettable impression with the government. So with that, let me hand things back over to Mike. And Mike, why don't you go ahead and take this next slide through?
Sure, thanks. So, so I think those are all great points, and we're going to talk a little bit about personas and things like that in a minute. When we look at the government audience, we look at government agencies, if you look at just sort of the largest tier of government agencies, and that's in terms of the total social media footprint that they have, last week they're engaging a little bit over 24 million people. That's through Facebook, Twitter, primarily. And when you look at all of those people that they're engaging and all the people who are following them, both from within the government and from outside, hidden within all of those millions of people are people you need to be identifying for your company and engaging with both online and in person. And one of the important points too that I want to make, and part of why I showed the difference in the technology and the growth of all of this is, think about data. A few years ago, you could probably store all of the transactions going back in the life cycle of the company Radio Shack, going back however many decades, on 4 terabytes, of disk space. And now they sell computers that have terabytes and deal with 4 terabytes. Walmart, alone, they go through 1 million transactions in almost an instant. And the same thing with the DoD and other things. The level of data and information that's expanding and is growing and is doubling every few years. So the volume of information out there and the growing connectivity of people, social media, social networks, and social networking, it's really just another way to gather information, identify people that you want to connect with, establish business relationships with, and then basically move ahead with those relationships. So really quickly before we kind of get into some other things, it's already out of date, right? It's 2012 chart, but I think there's still some good pieces to this. That if we look at sort of the outer ring, and you have your desktops and your laptops, and you go to the right, you've got tablets, you go to the left, you've got smartphones, and then you go to the bottom, and you've got all those devices connected together. One of the things too is that people use multiple devices, multiple platforms. There's some people, in fact, there's a huge percentage of people who will watch TV and be on their laptop or tablet at the same time. And so then you look at the next inner ring, conversations and interactions. That's where all of this stuff kind of comes into play. And then you have the different kinds of networks that, for a government, customer, not really as interested in the playing side of things, but obviously when it comes to publishing and sharing content, that's definitely an area that as a government contractor you need to be involved in. Localization, probably not so much unless you've got different facilities and locations across the country where you have either manufacturing or training facilities and things that you want to be, people to be aware of. That's more for service side companies, but definitely the publishing and sharing side and the networking side are definitely areas that you want to focus on. And then, of course, they have at the center Google+, Twitter, and Facebook, which for all intents and purposes really are the 3 big giants within the social media space. So now that your head has completely exploded, you've got all of this information, you've seen all this crazy stuff, you're asking yourself, hey, tell me something I don't know. Where do I begin? How do I even begin? And I think that that's a great segue into the next set of slides. So I think to simplify this, there's a lot of ways that we can treat this. We only have an hour, and obviously when we go through engagements through my company, we try to be a little bit more thorough, but I think focusing on the planning, the research, setup, and then how you listen and engage, and to touch on those 4 things will be a good starting point for a lot of folks. So when it comes to the planning side of things, I will say this: identify your business strategy and goals. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, hey, I know that. We run our companies, we know what our business strategy is, we know what our goals are. But the reality is I've worked in a lot of organizations, some large, some small, some mid-sized, and you'd really be surprised at how much disconnect and misalignment there is within companies of all sizes as to what your strategy and goals really are. So particularly when you're dealing with social media, marketing, anything, you really want to make sure that you actually do take some time to make sure that everybody is aligned on what it is that your core mission is. You can then use...
One thing I wanted to say there with strategies and goals, folks, with
Yes.
the government, there is no lack of information. I mean, at this very moment, we're able to pull up 300, the business cases. We're able to go into the IT budgets and look at the Exhibit 53s and understand where the government's going to be spending. So, and one of the things that when Mike and I worked together that we really helped clients understand is that how to align. It's not about what you offer. It's about their mission goals and how you help them get there. So there is, I mean, I almost think we could do a whole webinar on that, but there's an overwhelming amount of data, and we can give you some more details on that, on the pure goals of a government target.
Absolutely. And so I think the next step as you kind of look through that is to build out a profile. We've talked about this. We're looking at the different kind of segments of, generationally, what do people kind of consume as far as data and what are they interested in. But really building out a good profile of your customers. When I've worked in the higher ed space, we had several different segments of customers. And it varied between income, it varied between age, it varied between, location, career path, all these kinds of things. And so the real quick and short of it is the more you know about your audience, the easier it is to engage them in valuable conversations. And we're not talking about sales pushes. So definitely sit down. Look at your customer base. You may have different customers, and when you're looking at the government space, and you're maybe an IT provider or some other kind of solution or technology provider, your customer in FEMA or someone who's managing COOP, could be completely different than maybe somebody who's taking on an identity, management solutions you have or something else. So you definitely got to understand your personas, understand their interests, what are their needs, and then also you're going to look at the data to see who are the influencers that I need to reach, who are the people that they're interested in, because in a lot of cases you're starting off from ground zero when it comes to your social media strategy. You don't know anybody and they don't know you. And actually I will relay this. When I worked at GovWin, we were a very new team. GovWin was just getting started. Nobody knew who we were, and no disrespect intended to Deltek, but people knew that you worked for Deltek and you were hated because, my gosh, all I heard was, yeah, use your time and expense software, you guys suck. and so it was just, well, how do you shed that kind of an image? Well, really, we had to go to the basics and really start from scratch. I understand who are the people that are influencing discussions within the government contracting space. Find those people, talk to them, both online and in the real world, and then also figure out, what are the platforms that our customers use and things like that. Do they engage? How do they engage? All those are key questions. It takes time, but it's definitely very, very helpful and a key ingredient to the planning process. Determine your business objectives for social media and for your website. And I link the two together because really your social media presence needs to be integrated with your web presence. And I think, you have your core mission, you have your core strategies, but social media allows you to expand and branch out into specific areas. Maybe you want to just focus on building your brand identity so you're more recognizable in the space. Some people, I've talked to companies who have a limited social presence. They want to expand it because they both have government and commercial businesses. And their idea is, well, I want to use it as a rapid response technique for PR. Okay, but is that going to be as effective as you want it to be? Maybe, maybe not. Do you want to attract sales leads and grow your sales funnel? You know, that's something that a lot of people don't think social media can do, but the reality is it can if it's done properly. And then, of course, social media is a vehicle for customer engagement and support. This is probably one of the most powerful yet underutilized aspects of social media. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a couple of slides, but the reality is if you're engaging in discussions online and you find people are dissatisfied with things that your company is doing or maybe things that your industry is involved in, it's a great opportunity to engage that individual and try to turn the tables a little bit. And then the last piece, which I think is the last thing that people really struggle with, create measurable and achievable goals. You know, when you start off, and I'll say this, you're not going to be Lockheed Martin right out of the gate. You're not going to have that kind of social influence and that kind of success. And I think the key is you really have to be very realistic. If you're getting 3 opportunities in one, don't expect that you're going to increase your yearly total to 50 just simply by using social media. It could happen, but you know, you could win the lottery and you could get hit by a bus and a meteor could come and destroy the White House. I mean, you know, so you have to deal with what is realistic and what is achievable, and I think that's something else that people need to focus on. And this kind of comes down into the research side of things. So, you know, I pulled together a few examples of different tools and things that you can use, you know, for research, particularly in Twitter, in some cases in Facebook. There are with LinkedIn, it's much more hands-on. But so where are your prospects using social media the most, and where are they using it the most effectively? And I think one area that you can look at for, you know, doing this is first getting an idea of where, you know, where the different agencies are functioning in social media. If you do that and you can start to drill down, looking at their follower base, looking at the kinds of things that they're tweeting, the kinds of things that they're posting on Facebook, the kinds of information that they're sharing on their blogs, you get an idea for the kinds of topics and things that they're interested in and how ultimately you can respond and deal with them. And when you look, for example, let's just look at a comparison, you know, of users between the State Department, Department of Defense, and the Army. And this is just sort of a subset of that data. Obviously, their overall, you know, usage and profile is much greater than this. But you can get a very clear understanding of just how actively engaged people are. And you can have a huge audience. You could have 100,000 people following on Facebook and Twitter. You could have this incredible, you know, dynamic going on. But if your engagement rate is very low, like you can see sort of the yellow here on the left, versus having maybe a smaller segment that's very engaged, you obviously want the greater engagement, particularly if you're looking at people who have higher social scores and have more credibility online, because those are the people that are going to be retweeting the things that you're talking about. And obviously this is from a government agency perspective, but think about it from your company. It's the same rules apply. And I've been working on this with other clients, is how do you identify these decision makers and these influencers so that ultimately your data is getting shared and then seen beyond just sort of the normal realm of where you're being seen. With Twitter, for example, too, you can also dive deeper. You can use keyword search to search bios. You can look at that. You can do that for competitors. You can do that for potential partners, people who are involved in specific government programs or contract vehicles. Now, I will say this. Doing this kind of research, like the kind of research that, you know, Jimmy does in sort of identifying, you know, business development opportunities and other things, it's a time-consuming process. You know, everybody wants the sort of the silver bullet, the quick path, the easy path, you know, and there's sort of a line from an old movie. It was a crappy movie many years ago, but, you know, quick and easy is how you bake a cake by adding water, or how you know, clean a toilet bowl. Is it really how you establish relationships with people who you want to conduct multi-million-dollar business with? You know, I would think that probably not. The research is a very key element, and you can get into social authority, you can figure out who's of value, and then ultimately engage those people online and then offline, which is the key. With LinkedIn, it's, you know, there is a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more manual effort that needs to go into LinkedIn, and a little bit more research intensivity to it, because you have to look at the right groups, the right communities that you want to be involved in. There are huge directories of groups that cover almost every single topic that you could possibly think about, and the great part about LinkedIn is that, hey, if it doesn't exist, maybe you create one. Maybe there's something very specific around veterans issues and technology that you want to address, or healthcare. So all of that stuff exists. It's a matter of finding the right things. And then, of course, are there questions you can be answering? There are lots of people out there who have questions within the government space and potential partners, and you can participate in these forums and these groups and answer those questions. But another beautiful thing, too, is there also questions you can be asking? It really does boost your credibility, and you may not think so, but it really does boost your credibility quite a bit to actually be seen as somebody who's asking good questions, who's involved in the discussion, instead of always taking, you're contributing. So again, identify the discussions that your company has an interest in. Look at the top influencers in your core groups. See who you want to engage with more. And that's another area, too, as part of the research process that spans multiple networks that you can start to build, your plan and get things ready for when you get into the setup phase. So as far as setup, I'm only going to go through a couple of different things that you can do as far as setting up on social media, because I know we want to get to the Q&A and get into some more detailed discussion. Setting up Facebook pages, again, it's not a complex process. Usually the information and everything that you need to kind of create a company page and add the descriptions and put in the information is really surprisingly very easy, and it should be done as part of your planning and research phase. It's not hard to get things set up, but really the complexity comes into, okay, I'm not going to have Lockheed Martin's page when I'm done. I'm not going to have tens of thousands of people liking me right at the start, but I got to have something. I got to have a plan for how I approach things, and I think that's really kind of the key going forward. And again, Facebook may not be the right thing for you. A thing that I will point out about Facebook that I think is very underutilized within the government contracting space is the advertising functionality. So Facebook's advertising platform, and to a lesser degree LinkedIn's advertising platform as well, is really very targeted ads. You can really drill down, get very specific in terms of the U.S., states, cities, zip code, categorize people by age, gender, interests. In here I just did like some very quick thing. I didn't dive as deep into it as it allows, but just wanted to give you a flavor for the fact that, hey, you can be targeting very specific, precise interests as far as government agencies, people who are interested in government, all those kinds of things, and then construct ads and bid, for your ad price and set your budget. And then when people who have those interests log into Facebook, they see those ads. They see events that you have coming up. They see particular kinds of engagements. Definitely something worth experimenting with on Facebook. I think the LinkedIn side of things, because it's a more professional network, is is definitely something that you need to consider as well, because you can really target based upon agency and company and really get into some very good nitty-gritty stuff and reach people in a very effective way. On LinkedIn, when you get set up, you really need to create a detailed professional profile, and you have to have a robust company page. I can't even begin to tell you how many companies, they set up one page and they leave their products and services page completely blank. How could you do that? I mean, this is your opportunity to sell what it is that you have to offer and to drive and get recommendations and to build things out. People need to start thinking more of LinkedIn as kind of like the Angie's List for professional business. And by that I mean, service businesses, whether you're a foundation repair guy or a restaurant or whatever, you live and die by those reviews. And the same thing is true in LinkedIn. If you have a lot of great reviews and recommendations and people are sharing your content and sharing your company, it's just another way to stand out from the mix. And lastly, a thing I'll focus on as far as listening and engaging. So listening requires time. It's not a strong suit for a lot of people. People tend to want to just jump in. They want to be able to just talk and contribute. But the reality is that listening is really a critical, essential step to understanding what your customers want. You may have a perception based upon your research and some past experience of what they want, but customer interests change. And this is particularly true within the government space. Even though the government space moves a lot slower than the consumer world, you do find invariably that agencies change priorities. Directions change. A lot of times, they get more responsibility and less budget. So you really need to have a good plan to monitor, identify, and understand before you know how you're going to ultimately come back and engage. And the other part of it too is you have to allow the tough conversations to develop too when you get into social media. And this is especially true if you're building out blogs or you're building out other kinds of discussions. Show people that you're genuine, that you're interested in solving their challenges. And generally that does work very well to your benefit. On the engagement side, it also requires time. Joining a conversation after you've listened really allows you to contribute at an optimal level. And I'm not going to go into too much detail reading off of the slide, but I will say that it's a really critical piece to really realize that this is a relationship that you're trying to build, and it's not going to happen overnight. And so the last piece that I'll get into as far as engagement, because this is such a common question that I get from people when you go through all of these different processes, they're trying to set a budget, they're trying to allocate resources, and they always say, well, how often do I need to be doing this? How often do I need to be actively participating? And the reality is that there's never a hard and fast rule. I can't really say, even though this one study indicated that if you publish 15 or more blogs per month, that it's going to increase traffic by 5 times. Well, I mean, in some cases, yes. The truth is that, yes, there is a direct correlation between frequency of posting, relevancy, value, and the ROI that you get out of it. I mean, just think about it. If you want to date a girl and you call her up once and you go out with her once and you don't call her for a month, is that relationship going to be really strong? Are you going to go anywhere? The answer is no. So whereas if you're constantly talking, if you're constantly doing things, then yes, you're going to get a positive response in return. And so I do think that that's where budgets and resources and things like that come into play. So how does this all fit together? And this is kind of where I'm going to tie into all these different pieces. You really do have to understand your mission and plan accordingly. You really have to focus in on the research side of things before you get going and set those realistic goals. To get things set up the right way, both in social and on your website, is key. And some of that ties back into the search strategy, your analytics, how you're tracking data, how you're measuring it. All of those things come into play. And I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I've worked in quite a few organizations where the idea is, oh, let's just get it up, let's just get it going, and we'll worry about doing it the right way later. And then they wonder why they can't figure out why this is failing or why this isn't doing what it's supposed to or why these people are responding this way. And so it really doesn't take that much more effort to do something the right way. It's just some people just get a little antsy and they want to get rolling into it, and you understand that. But the key is if you don't have the tools to set things up as far as analytics and tracking, that you don't have all of those other pieces together, you don't have the right guidelines, you don't have the right interaction strategy, how you're going to respond to things when crises come up. All those little things add up. And if you don't have it set up, you're going to be scrambling, and all of that great social clout that you build up at the start could be erased very, very quickly, simply because you didn't take an extra day to do something. And again, this comes back to time. It takes time. And I will say this, don't leave it to the intern, and don't diminish your existing resources. Having worked in marketing departments and other organizations where you have to wear 50 hats, believe me, I understand that the temptation is there just to give it to the person who maybe has the most possible experience and the most connection to social media. But the reality is that if you spread your people too thin, or you put people who don't have experience in charge of specific aspects of your business, it's going to fail. And particularly if you're spreading people too thin, they're not just going to fail at social media, they're going to start to fail in other aspects of their business as well. And when you consider the cost of hiring somebody full-time versus outsourcing this and sort of building something, it's so much cheaper to outsource it to somebody who's an experienced professional who could give you that time and not give you that cost. It allows you to test, and that's kind of the last piece, the last two pieces that I'll focus on here, is that you need to test. And what a better way to test to make sure that this is something you want to do and measure and analyze it than to go with somebody who can do that for you, and then you say, okay, you know what, this is great, you've gotten it set up, we're rolling, now we know what we need to do, and now we can dedicate a resource to this. And the last thing I'll say is don't be afraid. It's one of the most common things when I've set up blogs and built out content teams. People get paranoid about what their legal departments are going to say or what impact this is going to have. And the reality is that trust your people. If you have a good strategy with the right contingencies in place in case of challenges, if challenges arise, because they always do, you're going to be fine. Because one of the things too is if you make a mistake and you own up to it and it was a genuine mistake and it wasn't something where you're trying to be sleazy because you didn't have a good strategy in place, people are genuinely pretty forgiving. And so I think that's the other key that you need to take into account. So that is it for now.
Mike, thank you very much. This is Ed. That was just really great, terrific guidance. And speaking as a pipeline manager, capture manager, proposal kind of guy, the focus part of this I think is really important. I think you do need to tie this to what clients you're trying to get to, because they're buying things that you're selling.
Exactly.
And I'd agree too, Ed, with that. Like, for instance, if you've got a 25-page proposal and we've all read sections C, K, M, and L, and we're trying to get the best, you can also leverage social media, videos, and other things with understanding that your competitors can look at them as well. But you can also market outside of the proposal, which is one of the things that I've seen as a great resource, leveraging social media.
Sure, and I'll just say this very quickly because I know we want to get to the audience Q&A. I didn't go into creating blogs, editorial calendars, and content strategies and content marketing. That could be a very, very powerful part of your social media strategy. And then the other part, like Jimmy referenced, videos and video content, utilizing SlideShare, infographics. A lot of companies don't even realize how much great data and information they have and what a great valuable resource an infographic can be to a government agency. We created at GovWin an infographic on a women-owned SBA program that was coming out, and created a whole infographic around it, and you could even find it on GovWin today. And the Small Business Administration loved it so much, they asked us to print off a whole bunch of big paper pieces in color so that they can actually distribute it to people within who they were interested in reaching for that particular program. So those kinds of things.
That's a really good point, Mike.
Yeah, and so I think it's one of those things where it does come back to your business, what you have, and finding those right pieces. And I think but there are lots of things that we didn't even touch on that that we can talk about.
No,
offline.
if we had more time today, I would actually tell the audience the story of a contractor that I know that leveraged a graphic for a security deal. It was under $1 million through GSA, but being able to show that visual of an understanding of the problem and what the issue is, it's a very, very, very powerful answer. It's a neat point to make, though. I hadn't thought of that.
Yep. So Q&A.
Yeah, let's jump right into a few questions. How do you ensure security, confidentiality of client interfaces on Facebook and the other social media sites?
So how do you ensure client confidentiality?
Ensure security, confidentiality of client interfaces on Facebook. So it sort of seems like maybe doesn't want to advertise.
Let me take a shot at that one. I have worked with the Microsoft Channel Alliance, and I do a lot of programs with channel partners and things like that. You typically have to give people some kind of form and a release that you can use their information. And you have to be very careful with it. And particularly for those of us that are in, bioinformatics, defense security, there's a lot of stuff you can't put out there. It doesn't have a play. But when I have done things, when we put public case studies out there, there's usually a permission waiver that you have to get, and the agency has to approve the use of them being referenced that way, and they're normally strict guidelines. It's probably one for your lawyers, but when I have done this with channel campaigns, and I'm thinking of 2 or 3 different campaigns off the top of my head that I've done with an integrator in a large product company where they're going to do something, and there's going to be a video and a white paper and a case study and some other things. They had to get permission.
Yeah, and just to build off of that too, I think the key is that every program has its own rules, and and a lot of times what I think inexperienced government contractors will do is they've got information, and their inclination is maybe to share it with somebody or what have you. And I've had situations where I've done webinars with people who have literally had to just walk out of rooms and just run because they say, whoa, you can't have that, I can't know about it, and and just bolt it. So I think as somebody who's had that experience in dealing with, the healthcare industry, it's personally identifiable information. In government, there's a lot of sensitive information. We build that into the strategies as far as, what are the kinds of things that we want to talk about, particularly when you're talking about, teaming opportunities or other kinds of things that, could lead to potential conflicts. You always want to safeguard that, and particularly if you channel everything through Facebook in terms of posts. If you set up a sort of a mini editorial calendar, the kinds of things that you're going to focus on, you could really steer clear of that, so of any challenges. So hopefully that answers your question, and if not, I'd definitely like to reach out to you offline, and we can talk about it more.
A question about the utility of starting a LinkedIn group as opposed to just being active on ones. Do you have some guidance there? This person had started a LinkedIn group and says it's a lot of work to do it.
Yes, it is a lot of work because you're starting from zero. You have to build an audience for that group. You have to manage it. You have to manage the content. So there's no doubt. I mean, there is a lot of work that goes into that. And from the Deltec GovWin input perspective, a lot of the input guys and all of those guys got rolled into GovWin, created specific LinkedIn groups that really revolved around particular contract opportunities and things like that. And so it becomes a matter of who do you know wants to participate in this kind of a group. So before you build it, instead of building it and they will come, find the people first. And in a lot of cases, you could be dealing with a small group of people. You could be dealing with only 50 people or 100 people. But the reality is that if those are the 50, 100 people that you want, who the hell cares? I mean, you don't need to have a group of 80,000 people to be relevant and impactful. In a GovWin, we had our own kind of teaming centers and groups too, where people could join in and do things. But LinkedIn was so much more effective because then people can see the conversations flowing, create those personal connections or professional connections. So I think you just have to start from the perspective of, yeah, I've got this topic, then finding the people who else might be interested in that particular topic before you go through the pain of starting it. You may end up finding somebody who says, yeah, I'll tag team with you on that because I've got some cool stuff that I want to share as well. And then it becomes something where you're not solely taking on the management of that process.
Mike, a question from Shannon. I think this is really at the heart of the matter. Why would government contractors and government decision makers care about a company's social media site when the company's chance of getting work is dependent upon the proposal?
Right. So proposals depend upon risk, right? And of course, how do contract officers evaluate risk? I mean, they have a lot of different criteria, based upon the strength of your business, the duration. I'm not going to pretend to know all the factors, but the reality is that, as we looked at earlier, is that people within the government space do look at your company in terms of its viability, its presence online. Do they look like a credible business as they're doing that research? And if they're finding you through social media channels as part of doing their due diligence on particular issues, they use LinkedIn and other social networks 100% of the time to get information as part of their research and information gathering, to answer, get questions that they need answered, and to engage with people on topics that they're concerned about professionally relating to their agency. It's just one of those things where it becomes an essential part, of your day-to-day operations, because you could be the smallest company in the world, but if you've got a big presence and you make those personal connections through, establishing online first and then building those personal connections, that ultimately is going to help you as far as helping to alleviate the risk that people consider.
Can government staff look at social media sites at work?
So they can. I mean, obviously, you hear about, the good and the bad of that. It certainly gets abused. How many, we've heard about the whole, Security Exchange Commission, scandals. I mean, there's all kinds of people who do the good and the bad with social media. Social media use in the government is up. A majority of people use it on a day-to-day basis. They have very stringent policies in place, depending upon your agency or depending upon the agency. So it's really a matter of understanding what those policies are, and if you're in the government, and making sure that you follow them. And then from a contractor perspective, understanding that yeah, people are out there because they're your next door neighbors, they're the people who live up the street. So even if they're not using it necessarily at work, they are using it at home. Now, one of the other things that I'll point out too that you can look at in some of the data and some of the different tools out there is you can get an idea of who's tweeting when and with what frequency, and you can also get an idea too of when people tend to use their networks and things like that. So tying that back into an engagement strategy could be really powerful, because if you know that a particular agency is going to be really scouring Twitter between 1 and 4 o'clock, hey, that's the time to be focusing messaging to them. Or if you know that a particular person really is only active between X hours in the evening or in the early morning, then you're starting to get a clearer idea of how you can ultimately seed content and put things out there to connect with them.
A related question from Emily: how do you go about promoting proposals on social media, and do you have an example?
So I don't think that you'd want to promote a proposal on social media, because I think that that is something that you want to keep confidential. And Jimmy, you as someone who's worked in...
One of the examples that I'm thinking of, it's a really good question, and I know back when I was a young guy starting out in the business, one of the things that people would do when you would have proposals and you couldn't meet all the technical specs, I've seen this done. I've seen it where people would do brown badge luncheons. I've done campaigns where I've advertised targeting people that go through different metro stops to get a certain message. But the idea that you want to do is that, let's just say you have a proposal going in for, let's say it's secured tablets, and there have been all kinds of problems with, and I'm a Mac lover, but there's been all kinds of problems with iPads and iPhones and some of the different agencies for security reasons. So let's say you're doing a proposal on that, and so you spend some time with, Ed helps you get your proposal ready, Mike helps you get the strategy to figure out that what we want to make sure that the government decision makers that we've identified that are looking in these certain social areas, we want to show them outside the proposal why there's a better attribute for our secure, notebook or tablet offering than the others. And you're just using the other thing that people use, and I will tell you this too. I mean, this is an old trick, but it's the classified ads. If you're bidding against someone, and I know we've all read 10K reports to figure out where someone's numbers are, who they're hiring. I mean, you put, I always look at my competitors and see what they're hiring and not, to get a handle on what's going to be happening. So again, I guess the premise is this: if you're locked into a proposal and you can only do so much in responding, and I'm responding to a proposal right now for training services that I do, and one of the things I'm showing to people is on YouTube, I'm saying, I can't give you a step-by-step verbatim 2-hour review of what everything I do in the proposal, but here's a link where you can go watch one. And so I'm literally leveraging my YouTube channel outside of the proposal to show them, and that's one of the things I do. So again, it's positioning more data outside of it. Think of it as the old-fashioned brown bag lunch, or where you do a technology demo. You're just doing a whiteboard session or something outside of the proposal to let them to continue to show your strengths. Hope that answers, and if it doesn't, find me offline, and I'd be happy to run that down a little more detail for you.
There is a lot to be said about how to use social media to get your solutions out there, so into an arena where the decision makers are going to see them, and that's a talent and a skill, and there's a lot of pieces to that. But let me move along.
Sure.
Let's see. Could we poll organizations and people on LinkedIn or Facebook on our page to collect data?
Sure. I mean, you can do a lot of different things. I mean, polling is a great is a great tool, particularly in LinkedIn. You can do that. You can do it through your website. You can embed a web-based poll and share it socially across multiple networks so that you're not just tied into one or another, and then get the results back. There are other things that you can do depending upon your budget and the focus that you want to do. There are lots of ways that you can collect really valuable data from people, so that's definitely a doable solution.
Let me hit 3 more quickly because we're right at the end. Do you have statistics on which social media sites are used most by government staff?
Yeah, they do have statistics on that, and to be honest, right now, Facebook and LinkedIn are, kind of the 1-2 punch. With LinkedIn has grown tremendously. Just a few years ago, only a handful of people in the government space were really even using LinkedIn, and that's gone up. It's gone up dramatically. So those are really the 2 networks of the networks that I think people are focused on. All the others, Twitter, YouTube, and even to extent Google Plus and some others, are popular. They're not going to deal in the same numbers, but definitely, I think the key though is don't focus on where the bulk of the government as a whole is targeting. Focus on where your specific niche is, because you could end up spreading yourself thin very, very quickly by just focusing on the top 5. And then the reality is, if you're dealing with something in the agricultural department or something like that, and then maybe it's just you just need to be focusing on 2. So I think that's really the way to approach that.
Let me give my 2 cents on the baseline too with this. What I typically suggest for folks, and again, I hand them over to Mike to figure out all the details of it. But what you basically want to do is mimic who you're going after. And what I typically use as a baseline is like go out to whitehouse.gov, see what President Obama is doing, and I believe there's 6 sites on there that he is using. Probably want to be in that. But when I work with a lot of clients, and I do everything from servers to fraud solutions to security, you name it. And what you want to begin looking at is that organization, that vertical within that organization where they're at. And sometimes for different campaigns, you may want to have some, I think Mike said, hey, Facebook and LinkedIn are probably great places to start. But I believe in mimicking what I see them doing to let them know I'm relevant in those places that they value to share information.
Do you have advice on managing up in my organization to get my management's attention on the importance of planning for marketing in a social media content?
Can you repeat that question just one more time?
It's about managing up within the organization.
So in terms of setting expectations with people who are ahead of you or above you in the organization. So I think the key is you have to understand how your executive communicates. And in a lot of cases, I find that it really depends upon that person. Some executives, they just want the quick and the short. Give me 3 bullets as to why this is meaningful, and then boom, go do your task. Other people are very detail oriented. So a lot of it depends upon how you communicate best with your particular executive. But I will say this, is that at the end of the day, you always want to go in with a very, very clear process, right? Set, what the challenge is, set what the solution is, what the opportunity is, and then really manage down the expectation. Because if you overpromise and underdeliver, it's just going to kill your credibility. And that's one of the areas too within social media that you have to be very, very careful about, is to really set down the expectation so that you can only succeed. And I think that's 2 tips that I would give. I don't know if Jimmy has other advice, but.
Again, folks, I think it goes. I also think it goes back. Every campaign that I do with clients, after we go and we gut an agency, we look at all the numbers. Normally, social media is a part of a phone campaign, an email campaign. It's part of when we talk with Capture what they're bidding. And one of the best things that I think in any organization is frankly. In my opinion, sales and BD and the technology are what really runs things. And I think it's very important that anyone that's in a marketing position really understand what the pulse of the company goes through when they're out on the first defense. And I agree, Mike, one of the things that you're saying when I work with companies on different messaging and themes and stuff is that, senior executives will have a different message that they share in their network, where your Cisco certified engineering professional will have a different one in his network. But it's important that all the that people in your organization understands the kinds of messages that they should. And like I said, I believe in following the numbers, following the mission and mandate, and it goes back to that old business case training. What is it that you have that helps me? Why is it of value for me to listen? And then you begin engaging with someone at that level, and I think it needs to be thought out. So I'm not really sure that helped the managing up through an organization. It's just going back down. Make sure each of your pieces of your organization have an opinion, because what BD needs social engagement and marketing to do is different than what Capture does, and then what your telephone sales force does. They're very different views of things, and they should be considered when you're putting your strategy together.
Absolutely. And I will say this, Jimmy misspoke earlier, because it's marketing that obviously drives the organization, not sales.
Has that been the age-old fight that says marketing doesn't give good leads and marketing says sales doesn't follow up on it? So you can tell why Mike and I get along so well. We bridge that gap.
Before we get into some special offers, one last question about Mike. Would you change this pitch at all if you were talking to a firm that wasn't in the government market but wanted to be?
So would I change this pitch at all?
Is
not
there things
drastically.
you do differently?
No, I mean, I don't think. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's really a lot of overlap. I mean, I think the government space is a little bit different in many areas, but when it comes to actually going out and building the strategy and sort of going through all of those steps, it really is very similar in many different organizations, because the reality is you do have to have a very clear plan, and I really tried to simplify this. I think within the government space there are other tools and there are other pieces of data and things that you would collect. And then there are some other data challenges that you're going to have compared to trying to get consumer data or other B2B kinds of data. But the reality at the end of the day is that you need to plan, you need to do your research, and then the setup and everything like that follows after that. But those are really the first two critical pillars. So I don't think there's very much difference, at least not in this context. So.
Well, it wouldn't be a free webinar if we didn't have some offers for you.
Yeah, and folks, we have just recently brought on the EasyGovOps team. They're going to be joining us next week, and we were on the phone with them this week, and all of us, I was a director for a small business, an 8A startup, and we're going to have a very direct talk with a webinar coming up in August on, what's really important, where the bad advice is for small businesses, how do you really grow a small business, and we're going to begin promoting that. And I had to learn the hard way, and I will tell you this, if you come to this, if you're a small business, whether you're 5 million, 15 million, we're going to show you some very hard techniques to do that. That's going to be coming up with EasyGov. They have an offer today. You can buy their service by the cup, by the drink. They're going to let you try it. They'll sit down and do a tour with you. And like I said, if your company doesn't have access to a database where you can get, you can look at what the RFPs are coming out. You can look at some of the awarded contracts. They also have a pretty sharp research arm. I've personally experienced, give Mike a call or Jamie Bratton, and they'll be able to go through this with you. And like I said, we're going to be doing a series with them next month, really geared specifically on the small business.
And all of the search engines go to the same source to get the basic data about procurements, but EasyGov has information about the competition and about pricing that you won't find other places. So sign up for the free trial and you'll see that stuff. I focus on proposals and pipeline management and capture. And from a social media standpoint, what I found particularly effective is to have something to drive the clientele that you're looking for too, like webinars. And I do webinars for clients that are designed to use social media in order to attract the government clientele into that community so that they're in a position to really show their expertise and establish that level of credibility. I work on proposals and access to the clients, and I'm really downstreamed in a lot of ways. But I focus quite a lot on pipeline management, and I do have an offer combining my 2.5-hour training, which is about positioning, readiness, and getting into the proposal so that you are not wasting any of your capture dollars and using them most effectively, combined with a pipeline manager. And there's also a free trial of the pipeline manager. So I encourage you to go up to the ERS Advisors site, and if you go to webinar specials, you'll see this special where I combine the desktop version of the pipeline tracker with the training program. And Jimmy, your book is always a good buy, whether it's $17 or $5. Although I like the $5 Kindle offer.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, folks. I am a research strategist that helps companies understand where the money is and go kick the doors in. The book talks about that. It's a short read. You have access to it on Kindle or paperback. If you're willing to buy a copy here before August 1st and email me a receipt, I'll sit down and do a 30-minute strategy session with you, and we'll go over some of the concepts that are in the book and hopefully be able to apply those to help your team have some growth. I also, for those of you that are looking for your larger company, we have some larger companies on the phone today, through my publisher only, Bart Libby Press, I can do orders on 25 books or more at $5 each, and you'd have to contact me directly for that. But again, thank you for listening, and you can learn more about the book and reviews. The book even has a LinkedIn page as well, so come check us out.
And one of our partners is Set Aside Alert, and let's see, the offer here is 12-month subscription for, I'm going to move my screen over, that looks like about half price, $397. And I'm sure you can get an example, a trial of the newsletter. It's a great read, and it's a quick read, and you're just so much smarter after reading this newsletter every month. And
I don't have a slide, but I definitely want to let people know that if you're interested in working with me and Social Web Tactics and sort of building out a social media strategy, but also even looking at your overall web and search strategy as well, either merged together or in different segments, definitely give me a call or shoot me an email, just mike@hackmer.com or michael.hackmer@socialwebtactics and .com, and definitely love to talk with you more about how we can improve not just how you're collecting data, but also how you're ultimately connecting with people and and improve your overall marketing message and your social media presence. So,
Mike, thanks for being on with us. I think people got an awful lot out of it. I know that I did, and thanks to the audience, especially those of you who stuck through to the end. We had well over 100 people on today, and so we appreciate your.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back, Mike. I think we've just begun to scratch the surface on this topic.
Sure, be a pleasure. Thank you so much, guys, for having me.
And please take the survey, which will pop up as you sign off. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. We're doing a series starting in September on GSA schedules. I think we did have a slide on that, but that'll be in the email that comes out to you as a follow-up to this. And the slides will be available as well as the recording in a couple of days, and you'll all be alerted to that. So with that, I'm going to sign off on the webinar.